Divi Nation, thank you for joining us in this live stream. Today we're going to show you how to create a seamless hover grid with Divi. So if you're non-elegant themes member yet, make sure that you check out Divi. I've mentioned it in one of the links in the description below. And without any further ado, let's get to it. Alright. Want to say hi to everyone on YouTube this time around. We're only streaming to YouTube because I have some issues connecting to a live stream on Facebook. So I hope you guys are joining there, and I'll be keeping an eye on the comments. If you guys have any questions, make sure to ask, and I'll be keeping an eye on those. So let's start off by taking a quick look at the outcome of this tutorial. So over here we have a preview on desktop, and let me just hover one of these items. As soon as I hover one of these items, a background image shows up, some additional text shows up, and the styles of the button change alongside the styles of the text module in the top left corner. So this goes for each one of these items in the grid. So you can definitely see that it's a grid containing 4 columns. We are using a row for this. And it just gives this kind of like seamless effect. Now on smaller screen sizes, we have a similar outcome, but it'll respond to touch instead. So obviously over here, because I'm viewing it on my laptop, it shows up when I hover it. But you know, technically when someone's visiting on smaller screen sizes through their phone, they're gonna have to touch it for it to appear, which also gives like this intuitive design. Really cool, really clean. And yeah, we're gonna recreate this using Divi. So yeah, let's start off. I've created a new page over here dedicated to this tutorial, and I'm gonna enable the visual builder at the top. All right, so as soon as you create a new page, you get 3 options. We're gonna build from scratch. And we're building this layout with one section. So this entire design is made out of one section, 1 row, 4 columns. We already have a section here by default when we enable the visual builder on a new page. And we're going to open these section settings. Before adding any other elements, I'm going to use a white background color for my section. And then I'm going to add a new row. So obviously, as you can notice in the preview, we need 4 equally sized columns. So that's the column structure we're going for. And you can also notice that this is kind of like full width until a certain point. Now, if I zoom out, at a certain point, it stops. So you can decide for yourself if you want it to always be like 100%. In this case, that could be really convenient too. So we're going to go to the sizing settings, and we're going to make sure that it always takes up the entire width of the container by adding 100% to the width and 100% to the max width over here. And we're also going to remove all gutter width by selecting 1 over here. So we're enabling the use custom gutter width option, and we're using 1 for the gutter width. So this will just allow the row to go ahead and touch the left and right side of the section container. We're also going to remove the top and bottom padding of our row. So by default, we have a value for the top and the bottom row padding, and we want that to be gone because of the fact that we'll be using column borders that you can notice over here. And to be able to allow the top and the bottom border to touch these column borders, we'll need to remove the top and bottom padding. And then we'll also add the top and bottom border, which is going to be like 1 pixel for each one of these. And I'm just going to select that color code. It's this kind of subtle gray color. You can use any color you want. You can obviously style this however you want. We're first going to like focus on having all of the elements in place. We're going to create the first column and stuff. And then we'll focus on functionality. So how we're going to make sure that we have the kind of outcome that was shown over here. So we're creating 1 column after this and then reusing it for the other 3, and then focusing on functionality on hover. All right. Next up, we're going to open the column settings. So as I mentioned before, we're going to focus on the first column, and then afterwards we're going to reuse that column. So we're going to start off by making some changes to column 1. I'm going to open these settings over here, and I'll start by adding a gradient background. You can notice that here to like this kind of overlay. So I'm going to add 2 color codes there. Let me just grab those color codes. This is the first one we're using, completely transparent color, and then black. You can find all of the color codes and all of the steps written down in the blog post as well, which is linked at the beginning of the description below. So you can go there and follow everything step by step as well. And you can also download the JSON file to this layout for free. All right, so I'm also going to change the start position to 30% here. And then I'm going to open the background settings, and I'm going to add a background image on hover. So meaning that by default, we don't want a background image, but as soon as it's hovered, we want one. So I'm going to enable the hover option at the top here, go to the hover option here, and then I'm going to select a background image of my choice. So now we have that in a hover state, but not in a default state. So these can remain as they are over here. And I'm also going to add a CSS class, hover dash column. So we're going to need this later on the tutorial to, ensure that the functionality applies to other elements within this column. All right, so now that we have the column settings in place, we can start adding modules. So again, we're focusing on column 1. We're creating everything we need in column 1, and then we'll reuse column 1 for the other 3 ones, and then we can make changes. This is, to me, one of the most efficient ways to go about it. So I'm going to start with the first module. If I go to the preview over here, you can notice that the first module is a text module with some H3 content. So I'm going to add a text module here and add some H3 content. And then I'll go to the H3 text settings over here, and I'm going to make some changes. So these are just, the design style that I chose to work with. You can style this however you want. But if you like the design here, you can follow all of these, custom settings step by step too. Let me grab the color code here as well. This is the text color we're using. So Oswald, ultralight, uppercase. This is the text color. And then we're going to use different values across different screen sizes. 3 VW on desktop, 7 VW on tablet, and 14 VW on phone. Which gives this kind of outcome up until now. We're also adding a little bit of negative letter spacing, -2 pixels. Then we'll go to the sizing settings. You can notice that there's this kind of box here. To do that, we're going to shrink the size of our module to 44% on desktop. You can see that it doesn't affect the copy because we've placed, the copy below each other. You can ensure that this is the outcome by doing the same thing on your end. So we're using 44%, for desktop, 48% on tablet, and 50% on phone. And then we'll go to the spacing settings. We're just going to add a little bit of breathing space that you can notice over there. First, we'll add some bottom margin, which is going to be 25 viewport height. This is the space we have between, this module and the module that's to come. I like to work with VH in this case because it adapts to the different screen sizes, and it doesn't, like, if you were to go for pixels as opposed to viewport height, you would, on smaller screen sizes for desktop, for instance, you would get like a lot of scrolling needed for some visitors to go to the end of the design. So for that reason, if you're working in height, going for V8 is a really good option. Next, we'll add some padding, 5% for top and bottom, and 7% for the left and right side. So this looks better already. We're also going to add a border to connect the top of the row and the module. And the borders we're using are the right and the bottom. So we're using 1 pixel for each one of these. This color code. And using the same thing for the bottom border color here. All right. And we're also going to assign a CSS class called hovers-title. All right. And then we can move on to the next. To the next module, which is another text module. But I'm just going to take one quick look to see if you guys have any questions so far. No question. Wait. What kind of websites will benefit from this? I guess that's a question. I can see this being very practical for portfolio websites and stuff like that. You can actually use this for any kind of website if you want it to be a little bit more interactive. I personally enjoy these kind of hover designs where something just automatically reveals. But that's just me. All right, so let's go back to the next module over here. But first, I need to correct something. Over here in the column 1 settings, I've applied a gradient background. Now I need this gradient background to be only applied in hover as well. So I'm going to remove this and I'm going to add it in the hover state. There we go. I'm also going to place it above the background image. So this makes more sense right now. By default, we don't want any gradient backgrounds. All right, next text module. Let me just add it over here. Let me grab the copy for this. Some placeholder texts. And I'm going to style this using Carla as my font. A white text color. I'm going to modify the text size to 0.8 VW on desktop, 2 VW on tablet, and 3.6 VW on phone. So obviously, because the background color is white right now, the text doesn't show up, which is exactly what we want. As soon as it goes to hover modus, it will show up because it's white. It's not invisible right now. It's just merging with the background color. And I'm also going to increase the text line height to 2.2 EM. Next, I'll go to the spacing settings. I'm going to use some bottom padding, 10%, and left and right padding of 9%, just to, again, have a little bit of space to breathe for the module itself. And of course, we'll also need a CSS class. So the way we're going to go about this in the functionality part of this tutorial is, you have Divi's built-in hover options, and they are really cool, and they are particularly helpful if you're hovering one specific element. So for instance, one module, as soon as you hover that module, you can change the styles of that particular module. But now what we're doing within this tutorial is we're triggering hover settings or options, whatever you want to call it, when the entire column is hovered. So right now, where I'm hovering is the column only. I'm not hovering any module within that column, but yet they are affected by me hovering the column. So that's where this tutorial will help you with other stuff you might want to do with hover options. All right, So hover dash text for this second text module, and then we'll move on to the last module, which is a button module. Let me just add some copy here. And I'm going to style this button in the design tab. 1 VW on desktop, 2.5 VW on tablet, and 4 VW on phone. We're also going to remove the border width by adding 0 pixels to it. We don't need the border radius either, so 0 pixels there as well. We're changing the font to Carla. We're showing the button icon beforehand. We're choosing a left icon placement. And we're selecting another icon over here. So this is the one we're going for. This kind of arrow that points to the right. Then we'll go to the spacing settings. I'm going to add a bottom margin with a value of 8%, left margin with a value of 9%. Again, just to generate some space. 5% for the bottom padding and 20% for the right padding. And then we're also going to add a box shadow. So this is the option we're choosing, the one that I'm hovering right now. I'm going to modify this to 2 pixels. So the vertical position to 2 pixels, the first horizontal position to 0 pixels, and a black shadow color. And we'll need a CSS class for this module as well. All right, so I'm just going to open a new tab here so we can go back and forth between the preview of the design we're doing right now. So this is what we have up until now. It's kind of strange that... Let me just take a quick look at this gradient background here. It should be completely transparent. Yeah, we're good. So this is the result we have up until now. So as you can notice, we have this kind of hover effect on the column when we hover it, but the modules inside this column don't change style. So this is what we have now. This is where we want to go. We also have this kind of transition between a gradient backgrounds and the background image, which we don't have here. So by default, you can't animate gradient backgrounds, but there's a way around it. And we're going to use that way around it within this tutorial just to create this kind of complete user experience. So it's not really necessary, but I did want to add it to the tutorial just in case you were looking for a way to do it. There's a way around it. Cool. So now that we have the first column, we can reuse it for, the 3 other columns in our row. First, I'm going to remove the 3 other columns, and then I'm going to clone column 1 3 times. Of course, you're going to have to change all of the background images for each one of the columns if you want them to be unique, like in this preview. You'll also need to change the copy, the button link, and so on and so forth. But yeah, we'll just focus on some really important parts in achieving the outcome design. So I trust that you guys know that you have to change all of the duplicate content and stuff. All right, so first what we're going to do is add the borders. So over here you can notice borders. Now these have been manually added to each one of the columns. So we're going to start with column 1 and 2. And these 2 columns have the same settings. And then as we move to column 3 and 4, different settings apply, especially because we need to make sure that these columns are these borders are responsive on smaller screen sizes. Here you can notice that we have a bottom border as opposed to a right a right border. So, okay, let's start with column 1. I'm going to go to the border settings. I'm going to use right border width of 1 pixel. And this is the color code I'm using here. Let me just grab it. There we go. And then a bottom border of 0 pixels on desktop, but we'll bring this to 1 pixel on tablet and on phone. And we'll also need to get rid of this right border on smaller screen sizes. So we're on tablet not, but on phone yes, we'll need to bring this down to 0. There we go. So these settings apply to column 1 and column 2. So I'm going to copy the border styles and I'm going to paste them over here in column 2. And then we have column 3, which needs some different settings. So I'm going to add a right border of 1 pixel here. This is the color code we're going for. And we're using 0 pixels on desktop, 1 pixel on tablet, and 1 for phone. And we're bringing this down to 0 pixels on phone only. So it seems like these are the exact same settings. I don't know why I thought column 3 had unique settings as opposed to column 1 and 2. I think these are the same. All right, so here we have it. Now we have all the responsive borders. Let me just go like this. There we go. And now the only thing that's left for us to do is change some styles for the child elements on hover, and we're going to do that using some CSS code. As I mentioned before, the hover options, you can use Divi's built-in hover options to make hover changes to one specific element, for instance, one module that you're hovering. But in this case, we're using an approach where if we hover the parent container, we want the child elements to change styles too. And that's done using some custom CSS code. And I think this will be particularly helpful for you guys if you're trying to achieve something along these lines and, you know, just go the extra mile. So let me just add the copy here. So what we're basically doing is over here, the ones that I'm highlighting right now, these are all styles that are being changed of the, you know, of the child elements once the column is hovered. And yeah, you can play around with these. It can be really helpful for certain projects you're working on. And then this here over here, this is the fix we are applying for the background transition. So as I mentioned before, you can't transition a gradient background with CSS. So the only way to go about it if you want this kind of transition to happen is using before pseudo elements. And yeah, you can reuse this snippet for any kind of project you want. You can also download the layout to this tutorial by going to the blog post in the description below. And I'm just going to show you guys a final look at the outcome. There we go. So very effortless. I'm just going to take one look to see if you guys have any questions. Yeah, don't see any questions, so that's a wrap. Thank you guys for joining. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and we hope that you're enjoying this ongoing Divi design initiative where we try to put something extra into your design toolbox each and every week. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one. Bye.